Hey, it's your favorite African guy reacting to a global economics video today. In this video, prominent economist Jeffrey Sachs exposes the hypocrisy of Western leaders. So without further ado, let's hear what he has to say.
Interesting, we heard from the Minister of DRC. What's wrong with your country? Well, we don't even start by saying the King of Belgium created a slave colony for 30 years. The government of Belgium ran the slave colony for another 40 years. The CIA assassinated your first popular leader, Mr. Lumumba, and then installed another dictatorship for the next 30 years. And then Glencore and others now suck out your cobalt without giving you tax income. We don't reflect on that. We say, what's wrong with you? Why don't you govern properly? And so we have a system, but we need a different system.
Here, Mr. Sachs brings up a great point. Many Western leaders love to critique about African countries and why they don't govern better, forgetting that many countries in Africa had been exploited for natural resources, while many of the colonizers did not educate the natives of these lands. Now that they have left, there are very few educated leaders who can make informed decisions for their nations. Here, Mr. Sachs is basically pointing out that these Western leaders criticize Africans for problems that they helped create, as opposed to asking how they could help make things better.
I come from a country that not only doesn't care about the world's poor, it doesn't even care about its own poor. 1 in 7 Americans is hungry right now. And they don't care. I mean, the poor people care, but one political party, all it cares about is cutting taxes for the rich and filibustering any solution. So we're in a world that's really tough. The private sector is not going to solve this problem. I'm sorry to say to all of the private sector leaders, behave, pay your taxes, follow the rules. That's what you should do.
You have to commend Mr. Sachs here for telling it like it is. For context, he is speaking at the United Nations World Food Systems Summit held in Italy from the 26th to the 28th of July 2021. The private food sector was also represented at the summit, and Mr. Sachs simply pointed out that the private sector's constant prioritization of profits over all else means that they cannot be depended upon to help solve the world's food and hunger problems. At the same time, he took a dig at the Western leaders in attendance, particularly those from the United States, by pointing out that even in the first world, there are huge gaps of inequality that they themselves have not solved yet, which is why he emphasizes the need to, if not change, then at least improve the system in its current form. If I could have a one-on-one with Mr. Sachs, I would love to pick his brain on exactly what about the system he would change and why. But anyway, let's continue.
And what the governments should do is the following. They won't, but they should. First, the G20 should become the G21 by inviting systemically the chairperson of the African Union and the African Union to be the 21st country. The European Union is a member of the G20 as the EU. If you add the AU as the 21st for the G21, you add 1.4 billion people to representation at that crucial event. That will change decisively the discussion because 1.4 billion people are not at the table for finance right now, and they need to be. So my first recommendation is the G21. I love the G20. Add one seat, 1.4 billion people with the AU represented.
Here, Mr. Sachs makes the point as clear as night and day The very fact that after all these years, only South Africa goes to the G20 instead of a representative of the whole of Africa reeks of some form of collusion, and in my opinion, explains the title of this video. Drop a comment to indicate whether you agree or disagree.
Second, we need an order of magnitude change of development finance. The rich countries just borrowed $17 trillion for COVID. The poor countries, nothing. Because the rich countries can borrow at zero, and the poor countries pay 5 or 10% coupon rates or have no access at all. So the world exposed its grotesque inequality this past year and a half. Rich countries didn't say, we tighten our belts, why don't you? My country spent $7 trillion of emergency funding, not one penny for anybody else, by the way. $7 trillion, it didn't even cross the imagination of the US Congress to include a few crumbs for the rest of the world. But the poor countries cannot borrow. That's what we should have heard from the World Bank. I didn't hear that from the World Bank. I didn't hear real numbers. Real numbers are in trillions right now because the world economy is 100 trillion a year. But we don't talk about real numbers. But my job, all I know in this world is long division. Divide by 100 trillion and then see whether you're talking about something real or not. So that's the second thing. We need massively to increase the lending and borrowing capacity of poor countries at near zero interest rates like the rich countries have. Then they could get something done.
Here he talks about borrowing. I'm sure many people know that the better your credit score, the more money a bank is likely to give you, and at better rates. I guess this is no different to how international lending institutions work. I suppose this just highlights how the system itself favors the haves more than the have-nots, which is why I agree that the system itself needs amendments.
The final thing is we need the UN as the core and central institution of this world, period. Because this is the only way we're going to have a civilized world is a strong UN. And it cannot be that the whole UN budget is less than my neighborhood's budget in New York. The UN core budget this year is $3 billion. New York City's budget is $100 billion. And then we say, why don't things work well? Because the rich are hoarding everything. Final point, rather than our 3 billionaires going in space, well, they could go into space and stay there and leave their money behind. That would be one idea. But another idea is we have 2,775 billionaires on the current list. Their combined net worth, 2,700, is $13.1 trillion. Now, I have it on good authority, you don't need more than $1 billion to be comfortable. But they have an excess of $11 trillion over just the $1 billion. So we should be taxing that and having a civilized world. Thank you.
Jeffrey Sachs.
Well, in conclusion, as an African, I do not think that there is a specific plot by the West to keep Africa poor after watching this video. Instead, I see that politicians are elected into office all over the world by a very flawed system. Successfully running for political office is expensive. Candidates therefore typically have to campaign not only for votes, but for campaign funds too. Politicians tend to enact policies that benefit those that funded their campaigns, regardless of how these policies would affect the everyday man on the street, and particularly the poor. This is why the rich get richer, and considering Africa has the largest percentage of the poor, we are just a victim of the system built to favor the rich. If I could change one thing about the system, it would be to criminalize private political campaign donorships all over the world. Give all the candidates the same amount of campaign budgets and funds from the government, and that would significantly reduce the influence the wealthy have on policy decisions and make for a more equal world. Perhaps I'm just dreaming. Well, thanks for watching. If you liked, please hit the like and subscribe. More videos to come shortly. Peace.